507C has been by far my most requested MRDS review, maybe my most requested optic review. Anytime I did a review or an update or a video or talked about something on social media about a different MRDS, people would always bring up the 507C. It is relatively new to the market, and I couldn't get my hands on one because apparently they were out of stock, which means they're already initially very popular. It's something new. Once Kinsey's Optics got one in stock, I drove up there, picked one up. I wanted to do the 507C, and the reason being, at this point I feel obligated, at least personally obligated, to check out every single MRDS that comes along, because a lot of people look to me for advice and information on testing, real-world testing. And of course that's in air quotes because everything's situational and contextual. But if you're not familiar, I do periodic testing on pretty much every single MRDS that's out there for long-term durability use, mainly with an eye towards duty use for law enforcement. A reason I do that is because the MRDS is becoming more and more popular for law enforcement use, and having been a full-time law enforcement officer myself, I know departments can sometimes try to save money in places where they shouldn't be trying to save money. And one of those places, of course, is going to be the optic an officer is going to use to deliver accurate gunfire. This also applies to concealed carry, though. You want to be able to trust your life to your optic. Again, concealed carry, the optic's probably not going to encounter the same degree of hard use, unless you take a lot of classes and do a lot of high-speed training on the range. But just carrying in the holster, an officer can, encounter foreign objects that can cause problems with his carry optic that you might not necessarily have carrying it concealed. If you're curious about the way that the process works, you can check out an in-depth explanation in my white paper, which is MRDS for Duty Use. You can find it on the sagedynamics.org website. It's PDF downloadable. It's a living document, which means I update it periodically with new round counts on optics that are going through testing or optics that have failed. Because I don't make videos on everything that's in the evaluation process, or I don't make a video for every attempt at an evaluation on an optic. But getting back to the 507C, I wanted to check it out. First thing, obviously, is it has an RMR footprint, which I think is super cool. Now I don't have to use the Glock MOS, because the Glock MOS it's a good platform for certain applications, but it's not the best platform for optic mounting because those plates break and those screws shear off. I wish Glock had made a better attempt at that. I would like to see them obviously improve that platform, but that's what I've been using for the majority of my optic testing because I'm not going to get a gun milled for every single optic footprint that comes out. But the 507C shares the same footprint as the RMR, so I threw it on one of my agency guns and started the process. If you're not familiar with the Holosun brand, they're big on dual power sources, meaning the optic has a 2032 battery and a solar panel. So I've got tandem power sources available. It is an adjustable brightness optics with multiple brightness settings for day and night vision use, which is super cool. And the reticle, I found the reticle to be, well, really awesome. I've got a 2 MOA dot surrounded by a 35 MOA ring. It's very similar to what you'd see from a Neotech or some of the other holographic sites out there. I haven't really used or spent a lot of time on a reticle like this with a pistol optic, and I found it to be actually pretty cool. I was worried about it, a little apprehensive at first, because I felt like, well, based on window size and just the application of the handgun, that optic is going to, if it's on a high brightness setting, especially during a bright sunny day, it's going to block a lot of what I'm trying to see, because I'm looking through the optic to my target, and I don't want a whole lot of optic busyness in my way. But I actually found it to be really intuitive, and I can see as a newer shooter, if you're new to a red dot platform, this type of optic could make it, could shorten the learning curve, if you will, of being able to consistently pick up your optic and train your eye-hand coordination it takes to get the dot, that greater discipline that you need on a red dot versus iron sights to start to pick up your optic window consistently every single time. So just the optic alone, in that regard, is definitely a win. It's going to help newer shooters if they're going to use it. And then if you're getting into MRDS for the first time, getting this versus one of the higher priced competitors could save you a little bit of money. So if you find out, you know what, it's just not for me, or I just don't have the time to put into it, you're not out as much money as you would have been if you bought one of the higher end, the higher priced optics that are out there. Like I said, it is adjustable, and the solar power option is pretty cool. You know, you're looking at a potential 10,000 hour battery life, which is huge for a pistol mounted optic. Of course, while we're on the topic of the lens, I do need to talk about two things that I didn't super care for. There is a bluish hue to it because of the coating. sometimes unavoidable. A lot of optics have a color differentiation between natural light, what you see, and what you see through the optic body. So it's not a big deal, but it is something that's there. It's something to be aware of, something to talk about. And I do feel like the window has a slight magnification. I mean, super, super slight. We're talking like maybe like 1.1, 1.5 in that neighborhood magnification, which it didn't bother me. But it's definitely something that you're going to notice, especially if you've got half your available target inside your window and a lot more of it outside of the window, or the half of it outside the window. You might notice a slight distortion. I notice it when shooting silhouettes at closer ranges. I felt like my A zone was kind of distorting compared to the rest of the target. That may just be because of the lens's spherical nature, but I do feel like there is a very ever so slight magnification present there. Throughout the review process, it didn't become a problem. I just kind of got used to it, but I definitely noticed it within that first couple hundred rounds. It was something that was like really there and really in my face. Again, after 1,000 rounds, getting into 2,000 rounds, just didn't notice it anymore. So after zeroing, the first thing I'm going to do with my optic is the 500 round burn down. If you're not familiar, 500 rounds as fast as possible through the firearm to accelerate the life cycle and see if any heat generated during the process will cause any problems with the optic or whatever I happen to be reviewing, but for in this case, the actual Holosun 507C. It does sit pretty far to the rear. It's an aluminum body, 7075 aluminum, which is really cool. Is heat going to create an issue? Is it going to cause any kind of distortion? Is it going to cause my reticle to fade or thermal shift or act bizarre in any way? And I don't know, and that's the reason why I'm doing that, because 500 rounds through a handgun, and usually it takes me about 3.5 to 4 minutes, that's a very, very, very high rate of fire for a pistol. So if a problem is going to arise during high round counts, I'd probably see it there. And then, relatively speaking, 500 rounds, when I teach a handgun class, students generally shoot 400 to 500 rounds in an 8-hour period. I'm about to do it in under 5 minutes. Yes, one step closer to either or arthritis or a repetitive motion injury, and it came through the burn down without a problem. Everybody's waiting for the drop test. That's become the thing. Like, yeah, okay, great. We heard you talk about all the cool features. Drop it. Go ahead and drop it on that concrete. So that's what I'm going to do. The drop test is conducted from shoulder height. I hold the gun out. Of course, it's empty for, the gun's drop safe, but let's not take any risks. And I go ahead and drop it from shoulder height on the optic body itself. The reason I do this is to see if the optic breaks. And the reason I do this is because guns can fall off of tailgates, they can fall off of bumpers, they can fall out of holsters, you can have a hard impact with a doorway going through. For concealed carry, you're probably not going to encounter as many possibilities of impacts unless you're, taking a training class, but it's definitely a possibility. So the two things I do, the one-handed manipulation testing, and that's something that's going to be a little bit more common probably than dropping the firearm. But it is entirely possible for the firearm to be dropped. And since concrete is, well, it exists and asphalt exists, and it seems like anytime you drop something expensive, it lands on something like that. It never lands somewhere soft, it doesn't seem like. Murphy's Law, if you will. I'm going to go ahead and do that drop test. So here's the first drop test. So as you can see, the lens did crack, but the reticle was still functional. So the very first thing I did was take it back down to the range and check the zero. Zero is good. The lens is cracked, so if this optic did take this kind of spill, yes, the lens is broken. That's a future issue. But if the firearm needed to be used immediately, it would still be functional, and that's a good thing. Since the optic is still functional and it's holding zero, I continued the review process, working through another 500 rounds, another round of one-handed manipulations, and then the second drop test. More damage to the lens. I kind of expected that. That first impact was more to the rear of the hood, whereas the second impact was more towards the front. That's one of the inconsistencies in a testing process like this, is I'm not dropping it out of a rig so it hits the same way every single time. Well, because life doesn't let things hit the same way every single time. So mine's a little bit more organic. It's not as scientifically based, obviously, but it is organic is what I'm going for. And I never claimed that these tests were 100% scientific. Anyway, they were just as consistent as the human me could make them. So after the second drop test, 0 check. Even with more damage to the hood and damage to the lens, the 0 is maintained. So it was on to another 500 rounds and another round of one-handed manipulations before the third drop test. That's 3 shoulder height drops on concrete. At this point I'm at 1,500 rounds. I'm getting into towards, at least for video processes, videos are always 2,000 rounds, the review process. But now I'm getting into that last 500 rounds and I got another drop test coming. The 0 was maintained, the optic continues to function. I didn't notice any undue problems, even though the glass is cracked and the lens is damaged and the hood is damaged. The optic is still functional and it's not distracting to shoot it. These are 3 drops at this point. So getting into the next 500 rounds, and of course another round of one-handed manipulations, I was eager to see if it was going to survive that last drop test. Yeah, it did. Again, checking the 0 after that last drop test. The 507C is still kicking. Yes, the lens is broken, but the optic is still functional. There is some significant damage to the hood, but the optic still works. And of course, the question becomes, like, at what point do you consider a test a failure? And this is a question I get. And I've always considered a test to be a failure when the optic isn't usable anymore. Even under exigent circumstances. If there had been a little piece, if the glass had broken out and there'd been a little piece of it there, and I'd been able to work the dot around to use that piece of glass and shoot, that'd be great for exigent circumstances, but I'd still consider that to be a failure because I lost my optic lens. The 507C, while the lens did take repeated damage, it was still functional. It still held 0, and those are 2 things that I need. Of course, if my optic took a spill like this, even 1 drop and even that slight damage to the lens, I'd want to send it in and get it replaced. I would definitely check my 0 before I carried it. But I would consider this to be a pass, and I'm going to continue testing this optic until, or if, I'm ever able to actually break the glass to a point to where the optic doesn't work anymore. The biggest problem is the hood design. An oval hood design is very, very common in MRDS optics because it prevents snagging, it's low profile, and the best design out there is patented by somebody else. So everybody is in a fight for, to a certain degree, second place on durability in regards to body design. Now there's other ways to make optics durable, but if you have to go with an oval style design or you're doing it because everybody else is doing that, that definitely does complicate the long-term durability of your optic. Now if the firearm lands on its side, it's not going to be a big deal. It's not going to take the same shock load that it takes when it drops straight on its top. But worst case scenario, of course, is the fact that an optic does fall perfectly on the top of that oval dome. And then all that force is directed, pretty much straight down into the optic glass itself. Energy does what it does. Things that don't want to move get moved. Glass breaks. The glass is going to give before the 7075 aluminum does. That being said, that's 4 shoulder height drops, no loss of 0. Yes, there is damage to the lens, but the optic is still usable. I would consider this to be a pass if I was going to do a pass-fail. Generally, it's pretty evident when optics fail. It's also refreshing to see this kind of performance out of an optic that sometimes gets its nose turned up. People turn their nose up at it when they're comparing it to some of the other big boys out there. You remember back to my SIG review, that thing made it 540 rounds in 6 hours. A very, very well-known, very, very well-respected name, has a very long history of producing quality firearms. just not quality pistol optics at this point. But the 507C doesn't have the same pedigree, and it outperformed it. And of course, it's not a comparison. It's just something I should mention, because definitely, if I don't make the comparison, or if I don't make the mention, somebody else definitely will in the comments section. The question becomes, would I recommend the 507C for carry? For concealed carry, I don't see why not. I don't have an issue with it. For duty carry, tentatively, maybe. 2,000 rounds isn't a whole lot. I'm going to continue this process. I've got other MRDS that have tens of thousands of rounds on them, and I've got a better sample size, if you will, to comment on if I'd recommend those or not. But I think they're definitely working in the right direction to creating a very, very durable, very, very reliable optic. And there's other features I like about it as well. I like solar power. I like light. I like the sun. So having an optic that has tandem power sources for long-term battery life, the circuitry there is pretty impressive. The brightness settings are good. It does turn itself off or turn itself on when you pick it up, when you activate it. They've got that motion sense type technology that you see in some other optics. The footprint is the same as an RMR, so I can put it on any of my milled guns, because every milled gun I have is milled for an RMR. So that's appealing. One thing I did not really care for, again, I almost forgot to mention this, but I want to make sure I get it in there, is the depth of their screw holes in the optic body are deeper than those you'd find in an RMR. So the screw actually sits lower in the body before it starts into your whatever you're mounting it on. Problem there, of course, is I've got to cut my screws even shorter. Otherwise, I'm going to create binding issues screwing down into my witness holes or my screw holes on my Glock. So I didn't really care for that. I'd like to see them raise that up maybe 1,000th, maybe a little bit more than that, actually. Considerably more, actually, to maybe closer to the RMR height for their screws, because everybody's at this point used to that. But that, and what appears to be a slight degree of magnification on the lens, and of course that blue tint, I don't have any other complaints about it. I understand why the glass took the damage it did, just based on, you know, physics and where shock load goes when you drop things the way you drop them. So my opinion on the 507C is it's actually a really good MRDS. And if you've been, you know, following the channel for a while, it's been a minute since I've had an MRDS make it through the 2,000 round review process, and I think that speaks for itself. I'm Eric Allen with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.